Following the rebellion of the spies, the Israelites are stranded in a rocky, arid wilderness, facing an immediate threat of annihilation from their own deity. God's proposed response to the mutiny is total erasure. The decree involves striking the entire population with a sudden, devastating pestilence to end the nation's history where it began. We find the parameters of this threat in Numbers 14, verse 12. The text presents a calculated, legally sound proposal for divine justice. The 11th century scholar Rashi identifies a significant theological friction point in this verse. If God wipes out the Israelites here in the desert, the divine oath made to the patriarchs, the ironclad promise to give Canaan to their descendants, remains unfulfilled. Rashi explains the legal mechanism. The oath promised land to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's descendants, not a specific generation. As their unbroken descendant, God can destroy the nation and rebuild it entirely through Moses, fully satisfying the original covenant's legal requirements. Moses is trapped. He faces an omnipotent entity presenting a solution that is covenantally flawless, leaving him no grounds to argue for the people's innocence. To save the nation, Moses must pivot the debate entirely away from internal morality and toward external geopolitics. We can map this confrontation using a negotiation logic tree. The starting position is the absolute decree to destroy the rebellious nation. Connected to that is the airtight covenantal loophole, fulfilling the promise by restarting the bloodline through Moses alone. Moses begins dismantling this logic tree by introducing external variables, factors that God cannot ignore without compromising his own long-term objectives. He deploys a two-pronged strategy. First, he exploits a geopolitical vulnerability, and second, he leverages a theological precedent established years earlier. Read through this lens, the biblical text functions as a legally structured negotiation. Every verse Moses speaks is a strategic move designed to force a compromise. Moses begins his first pivot in verse 13. He focuses entirely on how the international community, the Egyptians and the Canaanites, will interpret the sudden destruction of Israel. The linchpin of his argument rests on the Hebrew word yacholut in verse 16. Yacholut denotes raw strength, a measure of physical capacity that exists independently of mercy or moral justice. Moses argues the Canaanites will ignore the people's sins. They will look at the dead bodies in the desert and conclude that God simply lacked the yacholut to conquer the land. Rashi provides a mathematical proof for this assumption, based on the comparative scale of Israel's enemies. Until this point, the international baseline for God's power was the defeat of a single Egyptian pharaoh, a localized, centralized authority. The military reality of Canaan is far more fragmented. The land is held by 31 entrenched independent kings. Conquering 31 independent monarchs simultaneously requires a level of sustained multi-front force that exceeds the effort needed to topple a single Egyptian pharaoh. If the Israelites die suddenly in the desert, it validates the Canaanite theory that God realized he was too weak for a multi-front war and slaughtered his own people to avoid a public defeat. Moses successfully weaponizes God's ultimate objective, global recognition of his omnipotence, against the decree of destruction. With the geopolitical trap set, Moses moves to his second strategic pivot in verse 17, invoking the legal precedent of Erech Apayim, God's capacity to be slow to anger. Tractate Sanhedrin provides a historical flashback to a private conversation between God and Moses at Mount Sinai to contextualize this phrase. During that past debate, God claimed his divine mercy applies universally, extending even to the wicked. Moses originally took a hardline stance, arguing that mercy should be reserved for the righteous, and the wicked should simply perish. God ended that debate at Sinai with a warning to Moses: "You will one day need this broader definition of mercy." Now, in the Paran desert, staring down the annihilation of his people, Moses invokes that exact philosophical marker. Moses admits he was wrong at Sinai. By acknowledging that God was right, that mercy must extend to the wicked, he forces God to fulfill his own axiom. The intercession succeeds through logic. Moses traps the decree in a paradox by using God's own prior statements and his overarching geopolitical goals. God's immediate response to this logic trap is found in verse 20. "I pardon as you have asked." Rashi clarifies that this pardon is granted according to your word, specifically to prevent the PR disaster Moses outlined regarding the Canaanites. This creates a glaring paradox. Despite the explicit pardon, the adult generation is immediately condemned to die in the wilderness before reaching the land. If the generation is still barred from the land and sentenced to death, the decree maintains a baseline of strict justice. Rashi resolves the contradiction through verse 21. God swears an oath to ensure his name is not profaned by a sudden plague. The final decree must achieve two opposing goals simultaneously. It must execute justice on the rebels while completely hiding that justice from the Canaanites. We can now input the final variables into our logic tree: divine justice, geopolitical perception, and the theological precedent of long-suffering. The 40-year decree functions as the engineered output of these three conflicting variables. A sudden plague fails the geopolitical test. If the population drops vertically to 0 in year 1, it signals divine weakness to the outside world. However, stretching the deaths over 40 years changes the perception. The population line now slopes gently downward. This timeline mimics natural attrition. The rebels die in the desert, fulfilling the requirements of justice, but the Canaanites perceive only standard mortality rates, masking the divine execution. Verse 24 notes Caleb possessed a different spirit. Rashi describes this as twofold, holding one reality in his mouth while concealing another in his heart. The biblical narrative operates in the same manner. It projects the surface reality of physical wandering while concealing an internal architecture of geopolitical strategy and legal compromise.